All right, good evening. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. So I'm sure that a lot of you, like me, GoldenEye takes up a big old chunk of your personal gaming history, and having these three people here tonight is phenomenally exciting. A round of applause, please, for mine, Hollis, Dr. David Oak, Brett Jones. So, let's start on the end. Just briefly, who you are and what you did on the game, and then pass it down.
Briefly, so I'm Martin Hollis, and I proposed GoldenEye project management and led the project, and I hate the expression vision holder, but I guess that's probably fair.
Go on, be humble.
Probably, don't know why I hate it, but I do hate it. Anyway, it was kind of my fault, everything that was wrong, and it's my credit, everything that was right. Can I get away with that?
Yeah, it's good, it's good.
I'm David Doak. I was initially at Rare as a kind of system manager, so I wasn't there doing games. He employed me. And then I moved on to GoldenEye. Did a little bit of programming. You wouldn't really call it programming. I did things that I couldn't break, safe things. But then pretty much took charge of the single-player story design and all that kind of stuff. That was my role.
Very good. My name is Brett Jones, and I was employed as an artist, and I was responsible for all of the characters, all of the animation, 2 of the levels, most of the interface, and a lot of the reference stuff we had, because there was no such thing as the internet.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. So, how did it all begin? What happened? How did Rare get the license, and then where did it go from there?
I don't think Rare really did have the license in the beginning. I think there was just a kind of social relationship between Rare and Nintendo, and there was talk, and I think that probably MGM UA had approached Nintendo and said, "Would you be interested in this license?" And the word trickled down to Rare, and it was put forward that perhaps Rare would undertake this project. And Tim Stamper, who was one of the directors, took a few guys from his team, the Donkey Kong Country team, down to the set to have a look around. It was actually the press event, so all the big stars were there, because they're making a lot of noise about the movie, the GoldenEye movie. They decided for whatever reasons that they weren't interested, and I heard about this, and so I said to Tim, I'd be interested in doing GoldenEye, I'd be interested in doing this game. And he said, okay, write a document then.
Wow. We have part of that out front in the main lobby. Mm-hmm. Cool. And then what happened next? So
A document that I didn't see until about 10 years after the game.
Yeah, this is the thing, yeah.
I don't know if this is a funny story or this is like a kind of crippling blotch on my management record or what it is, but I forgot. I kind of didn't think it was important to show this document to most of the team. So Mark Edmonds saw it. He was the first hire to the team. He was the first guy I brought on board. He was a software engineer. He got to see this design document. But I think the whole of the other 8 people on the team, I don't think they ever saw this document. And in fact, the first time Dave Doak found out about this document, many years after GoldenEye was finished, I could tell that he was pretty skeptical, and he just had a kind of look as if he thought I'd written it after. That was what I read in your facial expression. It's not a proper way to run a project, really. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Hey, it worked. And that was, of course, pre-Nintendo 64, so there's talk of it maybe being a SNES game at the start.
I didn't really pick up on that. For me, it was just, I was interested in the Project Reality, as it was called. Later it was called Ultra 64, then it was N64, and that was what I was interested in because it was 3D and it was followed on kind of from what we've been doing on Killer Instinct.
Okay. So what was the rough outline of your initial design doc that no one else got to see?
Well, it's just a bunch of words, really. That's the problem. You can't really encapsulate what makes a game good. So it's like feature lists, level lists, quite glorious ambition about what might happen in the game, expressed in a kind of narrative way. But it was too much, really. And that's why the project took 3 years, I suppose.
Because the original concept was completely different, wasn't it, from what we ended up with? Idea of it being a virtual cop, like on-rail shooter kind of thing.
It was just hedged. In the document, the bets were just hedged. So somewhat it said it will just be on rails, and somewhat it said you'll be able to move around. Okay. Because at that time we didn't even know what the controller was like, because Nintendo hadn't designed the controller. It was that early. Wow. So later on we had a prototype. I think they used like a Sega Saturn.
Yeah, there was a Saturn. There was. I never saw it connected up. But
I don't remember this controller.
It was a Saturn with a.
The joystick.
The joystick was a joystick from a remote control plane, RC plane kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just kind of like obviously it had been Dremelled out and stuck in.
And then there was a later prototype, and then eventually we got the real controllers as you know them now. Although there were a couple of bugs in them, but the point being, we didn't know what the input was. We didn't know how many buttons there were. We didn't know there was some kind of rumor there was going to be an analog stick, but we didn't know what it was going to be like. So, if we could use it, so we were it's kind of crucial information. So we were pretty stuck. So we basically just leave that as like, well, we don't really know. And we knew what our ambition was. We wanted free roaming, really.
Amazing. So it's you and Mark to start with, and you're just messing around trying to get things working in 3D?
Yeah, it took a long time to get anything on the screen.
Especially when you don't really know the final...
Well, you've got no engine, you've got no... all they gave you was a bit of software to convert some textures, and that was it. So it's really a question of you had to do everything yourself. Mark started off trying to... The first thing I remember him drawing on the Onyx was it was actually a cuboid, but he made it look like a cylinder using the Guru shading. And that was like a leg. That was like a lower leg of a person. That took him like 3 weeks.
Man alive.
And that wasn't even on the final hardware. And he built it up from there. He basically did all the character work and all the AI, except Dave did the scripts.
Yeah. I mean, that part of it, kind of, looking back on it, I mean, I obviously wasn't part of that early first year or so, I guess. But, I mean, the analogy I always give, it's like, when people say games versus films, it's like if you're making a game, the starting point is you're going to design a camera, and so you're building. But the whole idea of having pipelines, exporter pipelines for moving the geometry out of the order thing, all that didn't exist. So it was a ridiculously extreme kind of bootstrapping operation. Which I had nothing to do with.
Well, so Mark was doing his work, Carl Hilton came on, Brett came on. I'm not sure I'm getting the order exactly.
Yeah, that's right, because Carl and I were at Bournemouth University together on the same postgraduate degree. We sat next to one another for a year, so he got a job at Rare, and I saw him again at our graduation, and he went, "Oh, do you know, you're not working?" I went, "No," and he went, "Oh, you can come and work at Rare. All you have to do is tell them this, 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 and this." So I did my interview, and basically I told them how much I loved Virtua Cop and a couple of other things, and I got a job offer before the interview finished, and it was complete fit.
Well, I'm very glad that you lied. Brett isn't a big gamer.
I'm not a big gamer.
Isn't
I'm
a
not a gamer
medium-sized
at all.
But the fact is, that's not actually that consequential, especially at some stations.
No, I just do colouring in.
So you're all quite young. You're not established developers greatly. So some of you worked on stuff before. Most of you, this is your first time in the industry. And hearing this, the higher-ups at Rare didn't really have much interest in the development of this game. Was it kind of just throw you guys in a room and leave you to get on with it, or?
Certainly felt that way.
Yeah?
Well, we were kind of on the back lot. We were in the stable. There was a quad, and there was like 4 buildings with a farmhouse. and stables round, and then there's a car park, and then we were behind that, so we were out of sight and out of sound, really, which probably was lucky. And the bosses didn't come over. They didn't come over every 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah, because around the, I mean, where Rare was then, Manor Farm, there was a farmhouse, which was where the admin was, and kind of like the hardware support, like Pete and
Games testers.
They
game
used to be there,
testing and stuff. And then there was a car park in what would have been the farmyard, but the kind of jewel was what was the Donkey Kong barn, which is where all the Donkey Kong SNES games were made. And then there was we call it Killer Block, that was, and then we were behind that. And I guess at the time, I mean, when I joined, it was it was unusual for me because when I joined the company, because I was doing system administration, I got to go everywhere because everyone else was pretty much siloed in their little thing. So I just remember on my kind of tour around, it was like going in on this is Bond. It was literally just referred to as Bond, and next door at that time was Diggers, which is what Blast Corps was at the time because it was a digger game. It was about diggers. But that's where the N64 stuff was happening, wasn't it? It was only on that.
Yeah, because when I started, I was put inside the main house, given a stack of videotapes and told, go and learn alias wavefront by watching these videotapes. And I was literally on my own in a room watching videotapes for 3 months, trying to learn how to do this 3D modelling, animation, rigging, whatever it was, until Martin came and rescued me one day. He gave me a test. Which
was a useful piece of work as well as a test.
But it's taken me 25 years to ask him what the bloody hell it was for. Which was, I was given, I think it was one of the scenes from Killer Instinct, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And he said, okay, well, it was this huge like volcano area, and he said, okay, I want you to put a camera in here and move the camera 25 degrees. So I did that. That was it. And then I got moved on to James Bond, so it was like...
I hope I asked you a bit nicer than that.
It was pretty mysterious. It was pretty mysterious.
Well, it's need-to-know basis only.
Obviously.
I was quite brusque with Duncan. He told me the story later on of what I said to him when I brought him onto the team. I said, asked him, do you know this, do you know that, do you know the other? And it's like, well, I think you're going to be coming onto the Bond team. And he was like, oh, well, I'll have to think about it. And I replied, I don't think it's up to you. Well, that's how he tells the story.
I suppose, so going back to that, there's a mythology about working at Rare back in the day, like all the barns and all the workplaces were strictly segregated. Is that true? Couldn't you just have a little wander and see what other guys are working on?
No,
really?
They
That's
liked
serious?
to keep us separate because it made us work harder, because everybody was making their own engine at that point.
Right.
So whatever game you were working on, you made your own engine. And it was a real farmyard because there were chickens wandered around and everything, and they did get run over occasionally, didn't they?
Yeah, chickens out there. But yeah, the competition was the other teams.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much how it worked, wasn't it?
You weren't allowed to look in the window and see what they were working on.
But again, also at the time, there was no. I mean, the internet was there, but there wasn't really much of a kind of web presence in terms of games journalism. Reviews were starting, but there was no. People didn't show what they were doing before it was done, so you couldn't. It's like now, obviously,
And we worked in dead silence. There was no music. There was no listening to music. It was like a library. And the trouble is, that stayed with me all my working life now. I cannot listen to music and work. It has to be dead silent.
Did it help?
Well, you don't know any different because it's your first job.
The reason for the rule was that I believe that they never expressed this. Tim Stamper and Chris Stamper never expressed this, but I believe the reason for that rule is, there's a lot of information that travels between people in like an ambient way or kind of by osmosis. Somebody like grumbles and someone else is in the room and they pick up and conversation gets started or whatever. So, I think that was probably their thinking. They said you can listen to music after 5:30.
Because we were still there.
Yeah. Well, that would be the second half of your day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the office Martin and I were in. Martin had a big big speakers on the shelves at the end. We often, well, probably not come 5:30, but certainly after.
It was
after
approximately 5.
yeah, we would just put something on and crank it up. Yeah.
Never reached my office.
That you were 6 doors along.
I know. It was about as far away as
They're
possible.
quite sturdily built, these barns.
They certainly were.
Yeah. I don't think I ever got any complaints.
Well, we couldn't hear it.
Well, you could.
Okay, so you passed your test.
Obviously.
Well
yes.
done. So what was the first thing you had to? What was the first, actual
The first-
in-game thing you had to get involved with?
The first thing I had to do, I remember this quite distinctly, I had to build a character. And I had just come from a MA course where we'd never done any actual character modelling in this particular course because it was all done with code. So it was make a character and texture it. And I remember making this human being, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. And I remember texturing it. It had blue and white hoops all the way up it. And they wanted to put this actually through the game system and onto the screen. And looking back at it now, it was the most ghastly thing you could possibly imagine. It was far too long, it was far too spindly, and it didn't really look that human. But yeah, that was my first wee job, getting something onto the screen.
It didn't make it to the final game, no?
Thank God, no.
No. Oh, that's great. Okay, so you're here then. David, you rock up as a system
Yeah, so
admin.
I've likened it to being, I kind of, I was a scientist. I left that to go to Rare because part of I always played a lot of games. I mean, particularly, I grew up with a ZX Spectrum. That was my brother and I used to just play that all through the night. And I'd done my degree and I'd done a PhD, and I had just happened to end up being the person who looked after sort of graphics machines, not as fancy as these ones, but in the molecular kind of modelling and visualization we used those because there was no 3D on like PC or Mac desktop things. You had to buy these expensive machines, and I looked after some of that. It was kind of like wrangling for, and on Edge magazine, which was the Edge magazine was the face of video games. That was the cool magazine of the times. Rare regularly ran kind of double page spreads, kind of animators, and they often had a lovely like a DK render or something or a killer render, supporting it. And there was one. It was coders, animators, 3D modelers, and Silicon Graphics System man. It literally said they wanted someone with an experience of managing Unix machines, particularly Silicon Graphics. So I applied for it, not expecting to get it. Was interviewed by Martin and Mark Bettridge, got the job, went and did that, and really hated it after not very much time because it was like the analogy I've given. It's like going to working in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but you're the guy who goes around fixing the fuses. So you're watching all these things and Oompa Loompas dancing and all this stuff going on, and then you're there going, are you going? Oh, what's wrong with you? Oh, the plugs come out here. So kind of got quite dissatisfied with it, and also I think, there was a culture of constantly being there, but I wasn't creating anything, so I was going to leave, and Martin said, "Don't leave. You can come and work on GoldenEye. We'll find something."
Did you actually say you were leaving?
I had some friends. This was almost like a dismissal crime at Rare. I had a fax come through from some friends who were trying to get me to move to New Zealand, in fact, and it was it was like a job offer. So I got called up to Simon Farmer, who was a kind of like production manager, and so I was going, "What's this? It's a job offer."
you were too valuable for this to be a firing offence.
Yeah, so it wasn't fun. And then I.
It was a good move to bring you on the team.
So I worked on the watch at the start, not the proper drawing parts of the watch, but the code for the menus. And that was. I was telling somebody the other day about this. That was a great introduction to the importance of QA. So I had, was there, reading my Kernighan and Ritchie, learning my C and learning how to do all this and getting this so that you could press a button and go to another page of the watch and all. had it all working, was really happy with it, and then there's like a bug came down from QA. It's like, oh, the changing the menu on the watch doesn't work. Went up to QA. I said, of course it works. Of course it works. How does it not work? Show me. They said it's completely broken. How does it work? I said, well, if you do this, it goes to the wrong thing. It loses where it is. Well, nobody would do that. Apparently. They would. Yeah, and it's kind of that thing, that's such an important thing, because it's learning that, QA and testing are your friend. And you're not ever going to win an argument with them. and also they're doing a lot of your work. I mean, they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting yeah. So yeah, did the watch, and then later moved on to trying to set up the story stuff.
So while you were going around, did you think I could be giving more? I've got ideas. I've got things that we could implement. Do you think?
Yeah, well, I always had ideas, but I mean, my overwhelming memory of making GoldenEye was kind of, there was two things. One was just that, oh my God, we're actually doing this. And then B was, yeah, but it's a complete fucking shit show. It's on fire. It's not any good. There's all these things that are broken.
The game wasn't any good for about two and a third years. So, that's a very common story. Over like 80%, 85, 90%, 95 even % of a project, the game may not be there.
Yeah. And also fighting, just the whole thing. I think we always had this rule, didn't we, that the performance-wise, drawing the backgrounds would be a third, drawing the characters would be a third, and then you'd import, one of the background models that Carl or Adi or Brett had worked on, and they'd done it to very specific specification based on what the anticipated performance was going to be, and you get it in, and the thing would run at 10 frames per second, just drawing the background. And you're going, okay, well, something's going to have to change. So on the art side, you had a lot of tedious rework of things.
Yeah, we and the thing was, at that point, Photoshop did not exist. So every time I needed to make a texture, I had to build it in my 3D graphics program, build it in this kind of 2.5D way of doing it, bring it into something called Ningen, which was this tiny, tiny little texture mapping program. Because our textures were what, 28 by 48 or 48 by 48?
Well, most of them were 32 by 32.
Yeah, they were tiny. And in Ningen, it was essentially a texture placement tool. So you'd have your character or whatever it was, and you would get 3 points: bottom left, bottom right, top right, and that would be your texture placement, and that would be it. So for something like James Bond, he had a texture here, he had one texture here, which was then reversed to be here. He had the one on the top of his head was stretched all the way to the back. He had one texture on his front, he had one texture on his back, and he had 6 on his hands, which was like the big extravagance, because he had to have a different one for each one. And I had to paint the pixels on this to get the fingers.
It really wasn't very good software. I watched Brett doing this a couple of times, and I just kind of like this. Because, it's so arduous.
Yeah, but we didn't know any better.
Well, we didn't have better tools.
No.
This was the best tool we had.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
There's no other way to do it, so this is how we do it.
Yeah.
And pretty much everyone on the team ended up knowing how to use Ningen, as it was, because even if you weren't doing modelling, so if you're doing kind of setup or design or anything, we put the markers in the model, because the pipeline for getting any information at all into the game engine, the starting point was the output from this polygonal modelling software. So if we wanted to specify things, like all of the navigation stuff was all specified in that. And that kind of involved the whole step of these quite heavy art files. You then have that background, and then have that imported into your thing, putting something on the background going, I must never touch any of the art, because if I touch the art, I'll break it. And then often, trying to, on these ridiculously expensive machines, but you'd have that whole thing, and you'd be interacting with it probably at 5 frames per second. If you wanted to turn it, you would nudge it around.
Yeah, it was a worry. If you had some big level like the dam on the Onyx, so the machine was list $100,000, I think. although Nintendo got them at a discount. So you've got this big piece of iron under your desk that's drawing this level on your computer screen, and it runs at 5 frames a second. And this is supposed to run on the N64, which is going to be $200. And it's supposed to go, I don't know, well, anyway, not 5. And then you're supposed to be drawing characters and props. So there's no reason really for us to think that it would be... In the beginning, we just had the big hardware and we didn't have any N64, so we were just taking an enormous punt. We made like 12 levels, mainly Carl, but also Duncan, and AD too. We made a whole bunch of levels. We just had no clue how many triangles the machine could draw.
They didn't give you like a handful of speculations, like it's going to have this much RAM.
I had to go over to California for a little 3-day go on one of the first N64, one of the gold chips. And like the first thing I did was like, okay, how many triangles can it draw? Just drew a bunch of shapes, icosahedra, and like there's the answer.
I mean, I had a day trying to figure out the best polygonal ratio to get Xenia's breasts to work.
What was it?
It is 3 ones at the top,
It's important.
and 4 at the bottom.
Sounds good.
But yeah, that really was one day.
Brilliant. 3 on the top.
Yeah. I could draw you a picture. I know exactly what they look like. I spent enough time doing it.
You don't have to draw a picture.
That's all I can do, mine.
So actually, that's a question I'd like to ask you. Actually, we have some of your concept art out in the front, and it's your sketches, character sketches. And how do you go from these lovely, or detailed sketches down to a 32 by 32?
Makes you cry, doesn't it?
It makes my head spin. Like how do you go from this work of art to a computerized work of art?
Everything had to be built. I would build things in like sort of 2.5 dimensions.
Yeah.
So if I was building a jacket, I would sort of like build it so it had like a sort of like curve on it, and then light it, and then render it, and then make it really small.
Yeah.
And then again, put it back in Ninja, and where we couldn't see things, I'd be painting little things back in, just so you got a bit of shading or a bit of texturing. I mean, so many times when you see things like Boris's shirt, which is the most hideous thing because there's no detail on it at all. It's just this horrible bunch of brown and yellow and red colours. When I modelled that, it looked great. But it, being this big, it just didn't keep any of the information at all. So you just had to sort of like work with that. And the other thing was, with regards to the characters' faces, we didn't have any reference apart from the photographs that the art department gave us. And they were very often just really hard to use because they were, say, lit from one side, or we didn't have a side shot from a lot of these people. So it was a question of trying to find pictures of these actors, again, without the internet, because it didn't exist. So a lot of the times it was, well, I'll just draw it then and make it kind of work.
I mean, now you get a lovely digital scan, a perfect one-to-one representation of a mesh of their head. It'd be amazing.
Yeah, you get LiDAR scan.
Get your metahuman and just drag it in.
It's true. Yeah, they can't deal with complex nose shapes. I'll tell you that for free.
So yeah, we've mentioned the lack of an internet a few times. So how did you do your research for all the things in the game? Where did all that come from?
I have a huge James Bond collection. Martin's a massive fan. He had all the videos.
No, I didn't have all the videos.
Who did you pinch him from?
Tim Stamper.
And we used to watch them every lunchtime because we had half an hour for lunch. So we'd pile into your room, stick a video in, watch half an hour of whatever James Bond film we had, have our lunch, and then go back and do a bit more.
I'll at least admit that I had watched all the films before many, many times.
Yeah.
There was a reason I said, I stepped forward and said I wanted to do the project.
Yeah.
You're a fan.
Dorian Kinsley books as well were quite popular for all the weapons. That was.
And Jane's Book of Weapons, wasn't it?
My Little Book of Weapons.
Yes, because it gave us all the firing rates and everything.
That's where that came from. It's good. There's fun. There's a site on the internet who kind of like did the reverse image lookup on it a while ago.
Yeah.
So the Aztec level is all of the textures of the kind of relief sculpting on the walls. It's just there's a particular coffee table book of Aztec temple.
He just scanned. I won't say the name. You're telling me he just scanned them out.
Yes. That's like.
I had no idea.
Yeah. No, there wasn't any rights clearance on that. Although to and it was Carl. To Carl's credit, I remember when he did the, it was a brilliant thing, when he did the Moonraker level, he'd built all of the level, and he'd kind of saved the space shuttle till last because everyone wants to build a space shuttle. I think got there, he'd run out of texture budget for it, so he had to repurpose stuff that he had elsewhere. Kind of just crop the UVs in particular ways to texture the space shuttle. And we really were. That was such a that level actually, in terms of, I'm leaping ahead, but in terms of of making the game, that was as Martin was hinting earlier, it's like 95% of the time the game is not what you want it to be. But by the time those last two levels, the Aztec and Egyptian, we had finished the levels that we needed to have in the game. Can you ship it? Yes, it can be shipped with this stuff. These ones would be nice. But also by that stage, we had achieved kind of mastery of all the things we were doing. So we knew what the AI could do. We knew everything. So it was kind of like that was actually the part of it where you were making something and thinking, you know what? Yeah, this is pretty much under control.
There's definitely a period in the middle of a project. It can even be most of a project where you have this kind of impending sense of unease and then doom, where you're like pretty much sure it's not going to work ever, and it doesn't matter what you do. And then, as things go rosy at the end, you get that kind of mastery, like you're saying. Yeah.
And there were there were levels that I remember, like the streets level was always, streets and jungle.
Oh, yeah.
were always just like, they're just never going to work because they had been modelled early on in the project and they were just massively over budget.
Yeah, and I had to redo the jungle. I think I ended up with like four plants. And 2 trees, and I had to make a jungle out of those 4 things.
Yeah.
And there was this sort of like amorphous greenness around the whole thing to give you an idea that the jungle went on forever and ever and ever. Yeah. And I had to put that broken plane in, which we had one nasty little screenshot from. Do you remember? It was a little Polaroid picture, and it was completely out of focus and overexposed, and it was like, this is your reference for the plane. Make it look just like that, only better.
You came out fine.
Thanks, Martin.
So having played GoldenEye, you finish the main story, then you unlock these extra missions. It was quite a nice surprise. So did you have no limits? You can do whatever you wanted in the Bond universe?
Well,
anything stopping you?
One of the things that I did was I put in the 4 extra characters of Jaws and Oddjob and Mayday and who was the 4th one?
This isn't the 4 I was expecting you to say.
Yeah.
Can you start the list again?
Jaws, Oddjob, Mayday,
and the other one.
And the Scaramanga. Yes, it's Scaramanga.
Thank you.
No, I picked those because I had good reference for them. Yeah. That's the only reason I picked them. I picked Mayday because we didn't have enough women in it at all, and my favourite model was Scaramanga, and I modelled him exactly like they had in the film, and he had this cross on him.
No, Samdi.
Brown Samdi. And that was the note we got back from Nintendo, which was, he's not allowed to have a cross because we can't have religious symbols. So now when you see him, he's just basically got this white tube around his neck, because I had to sort of like rub out the rest of the model.
I guess it's fair to say everybody was on a pretty long leash most of the time. And most of the outstanding characters, were entirely down to Brett. And my personal favourite is the Moonraker.
Oh, the guard.
The Moonraker cards, and they've got like the yellow.
Yes, and I made women for that as well, but they got pulled out.
They still cry.
Those booties are the best.
Well, I'd never look down as far as the booties, I can't say. It's the headgear for me. Yeah. But yeah, all those characters, they wouldn't have been there unless Brett had taken the initiative and stuck them in.
Yeah, thank you, Martin.
What was the issue with having the women characters?
You can't shoot women, they don't like it.
It's not fair.
Until we get to Perfect Dark, when you can.
Yeah. Brilliant. So, did you have any help from the filmmakers at all in putting your game together?
What sort of a question is that?
I already know the answer, but I want to...
I don't understand. Well, we were allowed to go to the set. I guess we went down to the set 6 times, which was in Leavesden, quite close to London. It's a facility that's been there for a long time. They basically movie sets. They're like enormous hangars, like implausibly large hangars, enough that they tend to have slight weather systems inside. So we went down to there. We got to see basically every single set we could possibly want to see, and we photographed it. Some of us videoed it better than others, and we managed to capture a huge amount of information and imagery that could actually be used. As for help from the filmmakers, I don't think they really did give us any help.
They gave us a lot of reference because we got a load of
oh yeah, that's true.
The photographs of the weaponry, we got photographs of the tank, we got photographs of the costumes for most of it, but I mean these were basically the promo images. So we got copies of all of that.
Well, we got plans for the film sets.
Yeah, plans
that
for the film
great.
set. So,
but mainly they just left us alone. Mainly their attitude, really Eon's attitude and the attitude of MGM, I assume, was, that we were merchandising, and they do the T-shirts and they do replica Walther PPKs and they're doing this video game. It's basically, we didn't look at it. They looked at it like one time. They turned up at the end. They looked at it one time, like 80% of the way through, and had a couple of comments about, I can't even remember what they were. They weren't devastating.
Well, take the bonds out.
Well, but that was more of a legal.
Yeah.
Somebody made a misstep, and in the beginning, Nintendo gave us a huge document saying everything we could use, and it was basically everything. It was essentially everything you want to use from every single movie.
Except Jack Wade.
Oh yeah, except Jack Wade. For some reason, Jack Wade had negotiated a better contract.
Yeah.
Anyway,
what's the actor? Was the actor called Jack Wade?
No, that was the character's name.
Yeah,
the
Yeah.
CIA guy.
You're just specifically not allowed to have him in the game.
It's a
which
funny
is why in the game, it's just in the caverns. It's just he comes on the radio, so it's like Jack Wade.
but we got the impression that we could use Sean Connery and Roger Moore and so on. So we did a 4 bonds mode, and Brett did some lovely. I think we had Sean Connery in the white suit with the red rose.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was great. And we thought it was a cool thing and everything. And after Nintendo got to see this, they were getting semi-regular updates at that point. But after a while, they said, no, you can't do that. You're going to have to take out the 4 bonds. So
yeah, because they'll have to pay the actors.
It's not just any. It was one particular guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, we had to pull those, and we had the celebratory 4 bonds match with 4 of us on the team. Played first to 100 or something. To say goodbye to Sean, and Roger, and was it? It wasn't Lazenby.
No, it wasn't Lazenby.
I think it wasn't Lazenby. I'm the only person on the team who thinks Lazenby's any good.
Is there a chance? Sorry.
I was going to say, we've only got 4 controllers, so we can only have 4 bonds.
Yeah. Right. Is there a chance that exists somewhere and it could get accidentally leaked online at some point?
It does exist.
I've been informed. Yeah, I've been informed that it does exist.
Does he? Yeah, the texture.
Oh, you can get the
big
portraits,
textures weren't removed. Yeah.
But I've been informed that there's a full working version out there somewhere in the world with 4 bonds, with the 3D models and everything. So, one for the detectives.
So talk about Nintendo and their family-friendly image and stuff, but it actually can be quite difficult to work with. Sometimes, do you have any major pushbacks, anything you really had to fight for, or any crazy notes that you just didn't think applied to what you were doing or working on?
I feel like sometimes the whole team was quite cross at some of Nintendo's feedback. But I always looked at it like, well, I tend to think they know what they're doing. So, we'd go through it, and I'd walk people through it, and we tried to make something out of every piece of feedback that Nintendo gave. And I've got to say, I think Nintendo added a lot with the feedback they gave us, which was, there's various different kinds and various different approaches to try to make the game better.
I think particularly NOA, so Nintendo of America, and what was called Treehouse at the time.
The Treehouse, yeah.
So that was their kind of big testing and kind of, well, it was testing, but also kind of like design feedback and stuff. And you know, there were times when, I mean, because they were obviously offset as well on the clock, you would, you know, do something, get it to a stage where it was working, particularly the kind of like, well, multiplayer stuff or single player setups and things, and you would get faxes back, which would, you know, there'd be the bug report stuff, but there would also be things like, I remember actually one weird just sprung into my mind with the with the Seven exterior levels, those two snowy levels. They were always kind of really problematic because trying to make them feel different, and also it was like essentially you're in a big you're in a big white box. So you know, how's it going to? And I think we had just added the thing where when the level starts, there's a little camera somewhere in the world giving you a little taster, and it had, I think it was the nighttime one, and the little taster camera view was the big satellite dish from a reasonable distance, and it's like every level in the game, it's foggy. And I just remember it was from Mike Kelby or someone, there was like a fax came back, and it was, you know, had the bugs and saying, oh, you know, it's just like, we really liked, you know, and it was just like, you know, it was, you know, really like that, really sets the level up and stuff and things. And it definitely felt like you had another, I mean, looking back on it, I remember, you know, at the time, a lot of us, you know, probably after the game came out, as well, you kind of think, well, you know, we kind of like, there was, you know, 10 of us in a room made that, you know. But actually, there was an enormous support system outside of the room. And those guys, I mean, I think they really helped.
With the NOA bug list? Yeah. No question.
You know, and also we had, I mean, I remember getting feedback from them saying, I think it was Ken Lobb was saying, oh, you know, the guys are coming in, you know, people are coming in doing extra hours the weekend, testing it because it's like playing the game and stuff and things. And that was all really encouraging, because that was, yeah, because let's say we'd got past the stage where we knew that we were going to be able to complete it, but still were just incredibly pessimistic about what people might think of it.
It's definitely a change from the usual Nintendo fairs. It's, you know, it's very violent, lots of guns, people die, people bleed. Was there any notes on the level of violence in the game at all?
Not really. I mean, one time we had this really vicious and grotesque flipbook texture. With when so Mark just happened to have it on his screen. You'd shoot someone and it would like gore.
Oh, that was the one that went like that, wasn't it?
And so it was way too costly in terms of memory to ever consider using it. It was just, we just kept it around for a week or two because we kind of liked how it looked. But also we knew it was wrong for the Bond universe. You know, Bond isn't really that violent. He shoots people, but you never see a lot of blood, if any. And it was wrong for Nintendo, which is like a family business. So we knew it wouldn't last. But at that moment, Howard Lincoln was on a tour of Rare, and he came round, and he came through very austere, and you know, we showed him the few levels we had, and this moment, and it was just like, as us standing in the room, it's like a crystallization. I realised, I think we all realised, there was absolutely no way we could keep this flip texture. But it was kind of a balancing act, you know, the whole way, trying to be a little bit violent, because people do die in James Bond films, and you can't take that away. But on the other hand, Nintendo's like a family firm. It's kind of sort of Disney.
I think a couple of the death animations were shortened. I think we
did
rolling on the floor after being shot in the nuts animation. Was shortened.
The one with the guy being shot in the knee was the worst, I think. Personally, because with the sound effects on top of it, it was just like, oh, I don't want to watch this.
That was myself and Duncan Botwood. So I was running the actual motion capture, and Duncan would be the person being shot. And the thing is with motion capture, if you don't want them to have that reaction of tensing, of I'm going to get shot right now, so I would make him do it with his eyes closed, and then I would go up and hit him. So those reactions you see are pretty real. So if you see somebody get hit in the shoulder, I've just punched him in the shoulder, or kicked him in the knee, or what have you. So it's all real, and yeah, he did suffer.
And also, I mean, that feeds into just the enormous amount of kind of cross-disciplinary stuff that was being done. You know, so Brett was, you know, doing the character concepting, modelling, animation,
rigging,
motion capture,
Concept
motion
art.
capture director, and then Duncan there. Duncan's been, Duncan did some level design and modelling, like the caverns level and various other, modelled most of the props in the game.
Yes, he did.
Did all the multiplayer level design and setup. Was the motion capture bitch.
Yeah. And that costume never got washed.
Yeah.
Never.
So, and I think part of that is probably going into the project. I think all of those things were almost unknown as disciplines. It's like, well, now we're making 3D games, but there's not a template for making 3D games. There's not a list of all of the talents that you're going to need. So people just moved into them. And it's interesting looking. I mean, I'm still involved in making games, and now, people come out of uni and they're often highly specialised, but you're always looking for somebody who knows what the people around them are doing, because that's the whole. That's how the multidisciplinary team works. That we had the fun of doing it in a really, looking back on it, it was just like. It was like a long game jam kind of indie project, because you were always, how do we do that? We'd no idea how we're going to do it. Well, are we going to be able to do it? And I mean, for me, one of the great things about that was working with Mark Edmonds, because he was, I would be wanting to do something. We couldn't do it because there was no code for doing it in the game or no AI. And Mark was always, he just.
Yeah, he was just a potted genius, wasn't
he? He was, and I'm sure is,
yes,
a genius. Yeah.
Yeah.
And very quiet and
very tall.
Extremely charming with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was tools, pipeline, animation,
he wrote most
render
of the software.
engine.
He wrote most of the software in the game. And Steve was in second place, but he was a late entry on the team. And yourself probably is third. I'd be fourth.
And Steve, I guess because Steve did that thing of the thing that you must never do. It's like, that's a really good game. Can you just add multiplayer?
Can you just?
Can you just? Yeah. So.
Well, I had already got him to do like 2 implausible projects before that.
How did you manage to do motion capture on this game?
We had this system called the Flock of Birds, which was a magnetic system, and essentially what you had was this rubber suit, and it had lots of little markers on it and everything, and it was tied to the Flock of Birds system through some wires that was up on the wall, which meant you only had a certain amount of room that you could move, and if we got too violent, we would literally yank everything off the wall. So if Duncan wanted to do a forward roll or something like that, we had to kind of measure out how far he needed to do that so that he didn't yank everything off the wall. So it was a very, very primitive system, and very often what would happen is I would have to then clean up the animation afterwards, because you would get a sequence where, I can remember this particularly with James Bond, right in the opening sequence, and he's walking across to do that famous thing, and his leg goes 360 degrees around his hip bone. Because it's lost because it thinks that the arm is now his leg, so I have to then chop out that bit of animation and reanimate the leg. So we had a lot of things like that, because very often the arm would get confused with the knee and things, and suddenly bits of arm would be on its leg.
It's not broken.
It bounced.
And so very often we would do all this motion capture, but it still needed to be cleaned up, and I think we had about 1,000 animations in or something like that.
I don't even remember. I mean, it must have been getting up towards that. So like for 1 hour of capture, how much cleanup do you think needed to be done?
I think it depended on how complex it ended up being and where it was situated. So for a lot of them, we would have quite a sort of long piece of capture, but I would only need 3 or 4 seconds of it. So I would cut out those 3 or 4 seconds and then make sure that was working, and then check that the feet were actually on the floor, because very often the feet weren't quite on the floor, and I'd very often had to reanimate those so they worked. So I would say every single piece of capture had to be reviewed and edited.
I remember watching you work over, so because we had the Flock of Birds initially, and then we tried another system, and then we tried another system.
Yes.
I remember watching. Do you remember the one with the balls?
Oh yeah,
and the big boxes. It was magnetic.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the brand
Optical
name.
System.
Forgotten the brand name. Oh yeah, it was cameras.
Yeah, because I learned how to set that up from scratch and everything, and we had to...
Like searching around for a better system, it's like, well, maybe it's a bit better.
Oh, it was great. The second one, the optical one, was excellent, because they had 9 cameras set up in the corners, and you had to switch it all on every time, and then you had to teach these cameras where you were in the space. So you had this long T-bar with poles on the end, and you'd have to go up and you'd have to sort of like bow to each of the cameras, you know, pray to them. And eventually, once you'd done all that, and then you checked the system and it realised where the space was, then it was ready to do the capture. But the optical system was much, much better, because your character was free of all of the wires. They could just move, because it was literally looking at the balls on the suit, so you could see where things were in space. Yep.
They're all a pain, but it really was worthwhile.
Oh, the second one was much, much better. We did many more captures for Perfect Dark.
Well, the movement in the game is what sells their humanity, I think.
Yeah, but Duncan still had to play all the women.
Yeah.
We put him in high heels at one point. Yes, we did.
Yeah, there's no surprises here.
but that data, I mean, I don't know how much the audience know about kind of like game dev stuff and things, but you know, nowadays it's very easy to manipulate animation data. You know, you can retarget stuff, you can fix animations, and like foot placement and stuff and things. It's all very easy. But then you couldn't really. I mean, the data you got was the data you got, and you could rinse it and try and tidy it up. But the tools you had for doing it were dreadful, and doing an animation from scratch was a lot of work. So I mean, I think I can remember like I was like late on doing level setups and stuff, and going, oh well, we need this, we need some typing. Oh, luckily we did some typing.
Which looks like mashing.
Somewhere. Because there was no way we were going to go and capture more.
Yeah.
I think the only ones, at the end, you did hand animate the kiss.
Yes, because their leg goes up, so I did that specifically. And I also hand animated the jump off
on
the dam.
Helicopter. The helicopter jump as well, didn't you?
Yes. But also the one off the dam, that was the first one I did. Yeah. Because it was like, okay, how long do we need to do this? How does it need to work? And then Martin put in that 3-camera system, so you get it played 3 times, whatever's happening.
Even if being shot at.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, that, as Martin said, I mean, that, I think, you know, at the time, the movement of the characters was really, really strong compared to what other people were doing, I think.
It was, yeah. It was good.
And again, another thing Mark did, like all of the, what we called soft filleting, I guess. You know, because the soft skinning that you get in weight painting and stuff that you get in all modern animation, there was no pipeline for that.
There were no weights. There was just a bit of code that tried to deal with the shoulder and a bit of code that tried to deal with the elbow.
Yeah.
It was something like that. It was Mark's handiwork. I don't know precisely, but there was special code in there to try to make the humans look good.
I mean, it's quite striking that, I mean, that's the first time I'd ever played a game where there was like context sensitive, like if you shoot me in the shoulder, they react to having been on the shoulder. If you shoot me in the leg, they react differently. It was really innovative. Was that from the start? Was it something you just felt like throwing in there for added realism, or how did that come about?
Well, I don't think it's innovative. I think we stole it from Virtua Cop. But thank you for saying so. I mean, a lot of people say. I should just say, it's innovative, thanks.
It really is, to be fair.
But that document that I never saw, I mean, things like that, a lot of those Virtua Cop things, because that's, you know, in Virtua Cop Time Crisis, you often have that thing where you're going into a tableau in front of you, and the characters are doing different things. You know, maybe somebody's jumping behind someone, maybe he's knocking some barrels over or shooting at you, and it just has a life about it and the kind of, you know, a short time frame narrative going on, and that was what we were trying to build with the characters. So the, you know, the classic, you know, the guy who always runs for the alarm, but that, even though he always runs for the alarm, at the time, you know, the time people's frame of reference was things like Doom, where you just have a first-person shooting environment which is collapsing on you all the time. Everyone is just being magically drawn toward you. The idea that there's some agency outside of that. And then one of the great things about the AI was just, random characters doing random stuff. If they do a random thing and it's the wrong thing and they get shot, then the player feels good. If they do a random thing and it looks good, they go, oh my God, did you see we did? Do clever stuff.
But it's just so much fun, isn't it? When you come around a corner and there's two people there and you shoot one of them, and the other one you try and shoot, you miss them, they run off, they reach an alarm, you're trying to shoot them just before they get to the alarm, they get to the alarm, the alarm goes off and you're like, oh. And like this kind of story, this little story unfolds. It's like, you could have done better. Yeah. You could have done better, but it's enormous fun to go through that, and again and again.
Yeah.
Were you aware of what other console-based first-person shooters were doing at the time?
Turok.
Turok. We
Yeah,
were always wondering what Turok was going to be like. Because the thing that they had kind of shown was that they had the dinosaur models and stuff, and they were nice models and they were well animated.
And the fog.
And they had fog. And Turok was nearly always running at a really good frame rate when we saw it.
It was pretty well engineered. It was kind of like a racing game in that the amount of stuff you're going to see is pretty constant, and that means you can make the frame rate constant. So they were hitting 30 across the board, I think.
And then just wondering what other people's control schemes was going to be, because that was,
we did worry about that a lot.
Yeah, so the N64 controller, there's one analog stick. You've actually got 4 analog axes that you want to be interacting with, for the turning and the look and movement. And GoldenEye, there's lots of controller mappings you can use. There's the one that we elected to use.
We basically put all the ones we tried that we thought weren't so good as options.
As options, yeah.
So they're in there.
And then added in the 1-to-2 controllers, which almost, looking back on it, we almost have the 2 analog stick thing going there. But it's, again, there are features in the control like the lean, which you just don't get anywhere else really. I mean, that kind of was not a dead end, but it just didn't become part of the kind of DNA of first-person shooters.
That was Ken Lobb's idea.
Yeah. And that's used. I mean, if you play with some of the levels on the high difficulty, if you're not doing that, you won't be able to shoot out some of the guns because it's going to have set up for that. And in some ways, I mean, that's all. I mean, when you get kind of internet, GoldenEye, let's look at GoldenEye. That's always the thing that people go for. It's like, well, I picked it up, and I couldn't play it. How could anyone think? How could 10 million people think this was good because I can't play it? So, well, you're conditioned to play a game this way. So it was nice when the XBLA one was leaked, because a lot of people were going back to that and playing it with the, saying, well, actually it holds up pretty well. So, yeah. But that just the other day, someone was at. I mean, there was a picture of me from. I tweeted it, and someone was saying, "Oh, what you're holding? Is that how you held the controller?" Because I always held it with my right hand on the stick and my left hand on the D-pad, and then I flick my thumb in this clumsy way. But do you play like that, or do you grind there?
I do the thumbstick under my left thumb.
Right. Yeah. So I think on the team it was kind of split. So yeah.
The 2 analog stick it's amazing. It's quite forward thinking. I think it's.
Well, and also
that's the best kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it is. It works.
Also, the non-4.3 support for you were really keen on that, because we had
the what support?
Making the widescreen, so you can set it for.
Oh yeah, it's very filmic.
Yeah. But you kind of were doing it because it was filmic. But
I mean, a lot of things were done in the game because they kind of had a filmy vibe, and that was one of them. But it like cues you. I mean, didn't we use that for?
We do
for when there was text on the screen.
Yeah, I think we did it for that as well.
For when it was in cinematic mode.
And there's another Mark Edmonds thing, that when you start a level, and the camera flies into the head, that was another thing.
It's kind of a shame when you paid all that money for a James Bond license, and then you make a. I was so worrying about this. How am I going to sell this to the guys above me? That they paid all this money for this James Bond license, and we're not actually going to see him on the screen. So it's like, but better try and show him at the beginning and the end of the level as much as we could without slowing the pace at all.
Yeah.
And you could see him in multiplayer as well.
And actually, when Nintendo came round, they said to us, the music. I've temporarily forgotten the name of the composer. What's his?
Graham?
Monty.
Oh, Monty Norman.
Monty Norman. So it's the famous da 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 da.
He's probably got some royalties for that, because that's how it works.
Well, Howard Lincoln said specifically to myself, and certainly myself and Mark were in the room, and maybe some other people as well. He said, we paid a lot for that, so make sure you use it. So you're like, oh, okay then. So you're just like, wash. It's like a wash. It's just like butter over the whole, spread over the whole game. It's like, yeah, you die. It plays.
Yeah.
like checklist. It's a good few bars. Sounds good.
I mean, yeah, the music in game is amazing. Did you have much oversight on that, or just leave them to it?
Well, luckily, we had Graham Norgate on music and sound effects, and Grant Kirkhope, who's more. I don't think he did any sound effects. I think he just did music. But basically, they were so good, I didn't really need to do anything with them. That, it was like, the sound bank's this big, and they were like, oh. So once that piece of information's delivered, and I told Grant, make sure all the tunes are 2 minutes long. And luckily, he believed me, and he did that. So they're not all 2 minutes, but pretty much. And, because they used to be real musicians before they went into video games, they knew what they were doing. Grant could play the guitar and everything, and Graham has his instruments as well. Graham particularly, so strongly brought out the aesthetic of the Eric Serra work, from the movie, and he made it. There's a lot more variation in the video game musically than there is. This is not a criticism of the movie, but there's a lot more variation in the video game than there is in the movie. He really made it work, and that took a lot of creativity.
Yeah. I mean, Rare, the in-house musicians at Rare were astoundingly talented. Mm-hmm. They've all gone on to have very longer careers than we've had, and it's funny because when making GoldenEye, I never really thought very much about the sound. I thought when I was doing Free Radical and Time Splitters games, I was more involved in deciding what the sound was going to be like and what the kind of direction the music was going to be. But as Martin said, it was just like, they would come up, what do you think of that? It's pretty good. Yeah. You were like, you got Grant and Graham driving the whole thing, doing, between them doing almost all of the music, and then you've got, now Ivor Novello winning Robin Beanon coming in going, oh, I'll do your tune. Do you want some music for Lift? Okay.
I haven't heard of this person, but I have heard of Graham Norgate and Grant Kirkhope.
Yeah, but it's just that was the amount of talent. I guess Graham Smith, we should mention, because he did.
Graham did the software for the sound, and that was kind of one of the only parts of software that was like an engine thing, because his software was shared by, I think it was used by 3 or 4 different teams. Yeah. Basically, it drove the sound on the N64, which was really a pain to write the software for because of the threading, and that it had to go through the GPU. You actually produce the audio in the GPU, so that was inconvenient.
So what's the process for making a movie into a game? How do you break it down? What's the level? How do you know, this bit starts here. How do you break that down into a level structure?
Well, I guess I just went through the script. Every time it said exterior, I wrote down, and then when it said interior, I wrote down what it said then. And I ended up with a list of like 15 things, something like that. And it's roughly what you see. But we didn't know what they looked like. They were just words on a page.
And you came up with a couple of extra levels, like the silo?
Well, yeah.
Duncan wasn't before my time.
Did Duncan make the...
Yeah, the one that, yeah. That,
did he do the last 2 levels?
No, the prequel story that's in there with the Seven Isle stuff.
I've forgotten all about that.
The Oromov stuff. To the silo.
I remember Oromov. He had a suitcase.
He did have a suitcase. He did have a suitcase. We were all that. Oh, that was there was a plan for. I was kind of like trying to add. I wanted to add some. It was going to be an Easter egg, but it was going to be if you did certain things in I think it was like 4 levels, then you would get something. No change. You were going to get an acknowledgement off at the end, because the starting point was that we had Oromov in the silo, and you chase him, and he gets into a lift or something and goes. But you could often get there and be shooting at him when he was in the lift. And so it was like, well, maybe he could drop a suitcase. And that would kind of the idea would be that, well, maybe you got something that was in the suitcase, and there were a few other things. But it was one of those things you kind of go, well, it's a special case where you're going to have to add something into the save file that knows about these. I mean, it was probably it was a late in the day thing.
And it had too big an arc. Because the structure of the game was, there's 18 levels. Whatever you do when you play level 1, it doesn't flow through to level 2. You don't get to take your guns or what, there's no effect. Either level 2 is unlocked or it isn't, and that's the pattern right the way through. So that's really clean, simple. It's quite arcadey sort of structure. So unfortunately, it's a good idea.
And there were a lot of things. there were a lot of things like that. Like for the. So the dam, I mean, the dam level was always a complete nightmare because of the draw distance. I mean, it's just insane.
I think we remodeled the dam. We modeled the dam, and then we remodeled it, and then we remodeled it again. Yeah. And then I had to do a bunch of legwork to make it actually render anything like proper speed.
So everything else in the game, the rendering is done with what called this portal. Well, Mon did it, but with this portal system. So it's how it culls. I mean, essentially, it's like any doorway in the game knows that you're looking through the door, so it should draw what's behind it. But if that door is off screen, then you don't need to draw that room. So it works really well for corridors. So the dam is not a corridor, it's just a big space with all of these portals. And instead of using the algorithm dynamically to work out what it should draw, Martin sat for, I mean, it must have been like a week or something.
I just did a visibility matrix by hand. It says from every, it's about 130 rooms in there, from every room you might be standing in, all the rooms that you can see.
So you'd go and stand one place and wander around looking to see.
You have to wait, if you're making a video game, you do have to do some horrible work sometimes.
Yeah. It's the classic kind of, you probably could fix this by doing a whole bunch of work and theorizing on it and do whatever, or you could just sit there
bite the bullet
and write the thing out. And there were loads of things. I mean, another thing. Do you remember? Because that portal thing was interesting because the way that we used to get the information into the game engine about how the rooms and the portals were connected was that there would be a list of this portal connects these 2 rooms in a text file, and the way that text file was generated was by sitting with the artist looking at the map they've made where they've written all the names of the rooms on them. So then I'd take that and copy it in. So it was the worst possible case. It's completely manual. It's massively error prone. But it never. Did it get automated? I think it never got automated.
Nobody came to me and said, "Can we make it better?"
Yeah. So you just go.
I guess it wasn't that
bad.
Just
go there that far. But sometimes it would go wrong, and you knew it would, and it would be obviously wrong because you'd look through. Well, when it goes wrong, it looks like Portal, the Valve game, because you look through a door and it's looking somewhere else. What was the other one? The throwing fences at one point. That was good. Remember that?
Oh, that was some bug.
Yeah,
What
when
happened there?
when the knives went in, again, there's some code which it's all was manually connected up. So for one point, you could throw chain link fences, and it was really good fun.
I was never really a fan of the hunting knives. Maybe fences would have been better.
Throwing knives were good.
Throwing
The hunting knife was a bit,
Yeah.
but it had a nice shiny texture on it. It had.
Was a good look.
It had the,
Oh, it looked good.
yeah, it had the dreadful inverse texture space thing for the shine. Yeah.
So for a lot of people, it'll be all about the multiplayer. The multiplayer in GoldenEye is phenomenal. It's still held up today. It's instant. One more go. Incredibly addictive. How did that come about? Was it really a last minute? Let's just chuck this in thing, or was it a bit
It
more?
was more like last 4 months, 5 months thing. I mean, I wanted it to happen. We'd run out of time. I forget how many deadlines we'd gone through. And I said to Steve, who's relatively new on the team, but was just an incredibly good programmer. He was able to, I was confident, even that, you have to touch code in the whole project. And there's a lot of code to comprehend. And when you join a new project, even if it's just like a 2 software engineer project, those 2 software engineers will have written a lot of code. And it's like more than 1 novel's worth. Probably more than 10 novels worth of code. So, we're getting up way past 100,000 lines of code here. So it's a lot to digest and to find your way around, but I was confident that he'd be able to do it. And I just asked, can you bang it out? Just get it working. Doesn't have to be done well. Just get it working. And he did it, and it worked, and we played it, and it was good. So then him and Mark sat down and they teamed up and they made it more. They made the code more sanitary, and that they made it more resilient. And then Mark did a third pass, fixing all the problems, mainly animation problems, with stuff like what happens when you crouch down. So James Bond's the only person in the game who can crouch down, usually. Multiplayer, all 4 of you can crouch down. So suddenly you need an animation for that, because you can see somebody who's crouching down. So how do you do that? So we ended up with like a kneeling thing, and it's a hack or a bodge. It's not a great solution, but it's good enough. So the character kneels down and they kind of skate over the floor. It's fine. No, nobody cared. Nobody filed a bug saying you can kneel on the floor and skate around. Because it's fun enough. If it's fun enough, it's just like you can win people over on that alone. So it was all stuff like that. You go up close because in the whole of the rest of the game you could never see Bond. Really, in an uncontrolled way. It was always like in an FMV situation. So so you get all kinds of animation issues, because his models were usually, you know better than me, but they were more like 600 polys.
Oh yeah, they were much, much higher res, especially the one in the winter suit with his big fur around his face.
So we had to make a whole batch of new models so that everybody could be James Bond or whatever.
Yeah, and they were much lower res because they had no joining pieces, did they? Here for any of the in the multiplayer, it was just if you moved your arm, you would just break. But again, nobody cared because it moved fast enough.
Generally, I think we got away with it. Yeah. So the other thing about multiplayer is four split screens, so you can see 12 characters, whereas in single player that never happens. The limit was more like 7, 8.
We only loaded 4 faces, didn't we, for random other characters?
4 faces. Anyway, putting that to one side. So there's like more optimization work done to make multiplayer, so the character rendering would be fast enough, and then more optimization. And then we built a bunch of levels that were super low polygon levels. Some of them were a bit like the single player levels. They were like a lower LOD version of the single player levels, and some of them were just, let's make a cool multiplayer level.
Yeah, so over that period, it was Steve and Duncan basically formed a little mini team. Duncan was doing all the design stuff and building out the levels. And another thing about it was we got it all working, and it was going, so it's going to need a whole bunch of UI and menus for setting this up. It's like, and there was almost like never a design for those. It was just, well, as needed. Yeah, we'd always play it off an evening, and then people would be going, oh, well, I want to be able to change this, or maybe have this mode, or there wasn't like a shopping list of deathmatch and whatever, and it just was all iteration, all kind of built up like that, and then for the levels, I suppose we tried every level in the game.
Yeah, most of them didn't work.
Yeah, most of them didn't work. I remember the Cradle was one where it was actually, it really felt different to all of the other multiplayer levels, but it was just, it was 8 frames a second or something max, so we didn't do it. The multiplayer became, I think I mentioned this before, but at that point, once that was in, that was kind of the first time we got the kind of like implicit approval of the other teams at Rare, because lots of the other teams, particularly Killer Team, wanted illicit ROMs.
Yeah, they started asking the testing department to burn ROMs for them. I didn't know about this. But, I happened to walk down some corridor and they're playing GoldenEye at lunchtime.
So that became a thing. So,
that's an endorsement.
Yeah, that was an endorsement. What was I going to say about it? Yeah, I mean, it just, I think at that point we kind of knew that that was, it kind of felt like a feature that was going to drive the sales of the game. It felt like something, and I don't know, I hand on heart, I think we wouldn't be talking about it now if there had been no multiplayer. I think it just would have been another, it was innovative, but it was the thing that, it's so transformative, because at that time, if you wanted to play a, multiplayer first-person shooter, it was a LAN party, and it was bring your TV and bring your computer.
Let's face it, you only needed one machine and one television. Okay, you needed 4 controllers, but that's enormously more affordable than 4 PCs and 4 monitors.
And it also gave it the leg. So obviously when the game came out, there was the initial kind of like production runs and stuff. And Ken Lobb, again, who's kind of like, he's like the 5th Beatle, isn't he? As far as the game's concerned, in some ways.
Yeah, I guess he's kind of George Harris. No, what was his name? The producer.
The guy's name.
I guess he was.
But Ken apparently did a deal in the States where they basically put the carts into Blockbuster, into rental, on like a no charge kind of thing, and rental sales were converting into purchases, because people would get it, and it's like, you might play the game and complete the game, but you can't play the multiplayer again if it's a rental. So and I think that was the success of the game in the years after it came out.
It certainly boosted the sales in the US hugely. Yeah, I mean, people would rent it and they'd probably think, I'll rent it for a day, and then after 4 weeks they'd be thinking, maybe I should buy it.
Amazing. So we're going to move on to Q&A in a second, but I've got one more thing to ask. So, you've been working on this for years, you've been playing it, you've been enjoying it, and there's always that question. Did you know it was going to be as big as it is now? I mean, you must have. I mean, you must have been playing it going, this is brilliant.
No.
We're 25 years from now, I'm going to be sitting in Cambridge talking about this. Really?
Yeah. No, of course not. Because
we
went to work, we worked damned hard, we went home, and then we did it again. Just rinse and repeat.
You're in a kind of, it's not like, I mean, how would you know? Your perceptions, your cognitions are completely set by the path that you've taken. You just spent 3 years on this project. You're in that bubble entirely. You don't really have that groundedness. You want to understand the mind of the customer who walks into the shop and looks at a video game. You want to be able to put yourself there, but It's like, can you really? And if you think you can, how confident are you going to be that you can? You just sat there thinking, well, actually, like, maybe it's great, and it's like, also, maybe it's awful.
And just a massive feeling of relief that we had managed to get it done.
Yeah, it was a relief.
And then, I mean, and also just, I mean, there's that, but then there's also, it's like, well, what
should we do now?
What do we do now? Because that, I mean, the phenomenon is very different nowadays because games don't have a physical release. But that culture from cartridge days was that, you know, you would gradually go into this extreme lockdown where you're trying to get to the goal, the master.
Yeah, you're allowed to make fewer and fewer changes.
And it's just like, you know, and it just, again, there's a weird kind of combination of just when you've got to the stage where you understand what you're making or maybe have confidence to kind of, you know, do wild, crazy improvisations on it or make, you know, we could add another multiplayer level, we could do this, we could add a new weapon, we could do all this stuff. It's like, no, you must not do that stuff because you are likely to break it. It's just too much risk. And you're almost, particularly, you know, anyone, mostly code, but, you know, when you're on that last run, those last few weeks and stuff, you're on call like a fireman or something. You know, it's like, this thing's happened, so this needs to be fixed precisely without touching anything else. And I mean, one of the best last-minute bugs was it came in really late. There was a multiplayer bug where if you picked a certain array of characters, which plays to what Brett and Martin were just saying about the model complexity, you could make the game crash. And it was the helicopter pilot model, I think, which basically you don't. I think, is it in the game? Do you see it in the game anymore?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
so it was
the reason he's not there.
Yeah. So it was the Xenia. So it was in the film, Xenia puts on a helmet and steals a helicopter or something. But that model had the face geometry underneath the helmet.
That's right. There's too much.
Yeah. So there's too much to you, and the combination of having that model and some of the other models that were more heavy on the verts and stuff put it over a limit.
Do you know? I worked at Leavesden several years later, and the helicopter was still there, and I got to get inside the actual helicopter.
The Tiger.
Sorry?
The Tiger.
Yes.
Eurochopper.
Yeah. It was there for years and years and years, and I got to sit inside it and pretend.
But Martin, you can tell the story. Martin and Mark, when that bug was found, it was the ROM that it was on had undergone a lot of testing. So there's already a big sunk cost into that being a ROM that you're going to release. And the fix for it was to patch out that.
Oh yeah, I patched the ROM.
But you had to write.
But unfortunately I had to write a decompressor because the ROM it was compressed by bespoke code that I'd written.
Yeah.
So I had to write a decompressor and then patch the code and then recompress it and poke it into the ROM.
And then have lots of people saying, "Are you sure?"
and I said to Mark, "Would you stand over my shoulder while I do this?" And it's like 2 hours of work. It's like, you know, if I get it wrong, then it's a shame. With like a capital S. So it worked fine. But it's not something you want to do twice, really.
And that was also, I mean, again, because, you know, internet bandwidth and stuff. The way that used to work, that ROM distribution to NOA, was that in the barn and in the farmhouse at Rare, on the top floor,
they had an
there was
ISDN.
there was an ISDN line, and Hugh Ward was in charge of QA, and that was the kind of thing. They would be sitting there, kind of like, you know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, having done as much testing as they could do locally on the build, or on that ROM, and then he would be on this ISDN line sending it to NOA so they could pick it up. It took forever. Yeah.
12 megabytes.
Yeah, 12 megabytes. That's a big file, mate.
It took hours.
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. Well, again, I've got to say, thank you so much for making this amazing game. And it's been obviously a big part of my life and a big part of these people. So I think round of applause for these wonderful people. are you happy to answer some questions?
Of course.